the talk shows. My name is Clara. So today we are talking about root out racism, both on the football pitch, our society, and social media. We are doing part two. So basically, there's the teenagers. Some of our teenagers in our society have taken their lives through racism. Some of celebrities have taken their lives due to social media abuse and football pitch. Things are getting worse and not getting any better. People are being tormented on the football pitch, and in all walks of life in our society, people are being tormented due to racism. So today we are standing against racism and inequalities. So that's what the agenda will be: race, human race, and gender. So that's what we are going to be talking about. There's so many challenges and discrimination. We are encouraging, obviously, positive and fighting discrimination against everyone who takes part in a football, in our society, in every possible way. So over to you, Carol Ann. Please introduce yourself to our audience and take the floor, please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon from London, UK. And as the writing facilitator, what I do is I support soul-driven entrepreneurs in becoming more productive with their writing by connecting them with their deeper innate ability to write. But more importantly, they experience an unlocking of the writer within. They experience free-flowing writing and getting their book written, getting their story written, because you cannot publish what isn't written. And all of this has come about through my own journey of unlocking the writer within. So I'm Carol Ann, the writing facilitator, helping you to unlock the writer within. Thank you. And over to you, Dr. D.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. It is 8 a.m. over where I am, and that is in South Carolina in the United States of America. And so I would say good morning to you all from where I am. I'm Dr. D. Bell Williams. I'm super excited to be here to talk about this topic. I run a education consulting firm where literally I'm a traveling global consultant. Really where I train transformational leaders using a culture-focused teaching model where we help leaders in education, business, and community organizations build culture where all of their stakeholders feel safe, seen, and supported. And with the work that I do, I bring in different models of what culture looks like depending on the clients or the people that an organization is serving. And that can look different for different types of people because we have to be able to speak different languages and not just actual languages, but also human behavior languages to different people, depending on the circumstances that they may be in or the knowledge that they may be aware of. And so I am super excited about being a part of this conversation as we talk today about standing against racism and inequalities, not only in our nation, but in our world, and what people are facing across the nation and how we can continue to have discussions and actual implementations individually and collectively to really, really tackle this huge task. So again, I'm Dr. D. Bell Williams, and I'm super excited to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. D. Over to you, Carol Ann. Please, can you explain the topic? Or I'll start with Dr. D. Can you explain the topic to our audience, please? Or what does it mean to you, and why are you so passionate about it?
Absolutely. So, for those that aren't aware, this is part two of the Standing Against Racism. So if you were with us on yesterday, there were a panel of speakers speaking about racism specifically, as it relates to, in sports. And because it was sports, I look at it as organizational, because our sports are organizations, right? And so today we're coming into part 2 and just kind of talking overall about standing against racism in industries, organizations, communities, wherever. And one of the reasons why I am so passionate about it is because it is a part of my lived experience being in the United States of America. Of course, you know that we are, as African Americans in the United States, and just people, period, who migrated to another nation. And for, of course, African Americans, we were brought here under the institution of enslavement. And so it is something that we have been fighting for over 400 years, since the establishment of slavery in the United States in 1619. And as African Americans, we've been fighting for our rights to be treated as equal citizens in the United States, all across the United States, and technically all across this world, because of the damage that the institution of slavery has had on the culture of African American people, or those who are Black. And so it is something that I am extremely passionate about. It's everything that I do as it relates to my work. Being a culture focused teaching pioneer, I am pushing a work that deals with helping organizations understand the needs of African Americans, whether that be specifically in education and community organizations and governmental organizations, or whatever the particular participation of African Americans, what that looks like. What are our needs regarding financial needs? What are the needs regarding community needs, education needs? Because every culture, regardless of the background, thinks differently, understands differently. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are being humble enough in our attempt to understand different cultures, to learn about those cultures first, and then, of course, find out what those needs are so that we can effectively meet the needs together collectively, so that everybody has a fair chance of being a successful citizen wherever they might live. And so those are reasons why I am super passionate about it. As a 19-year veteran educator, of course, my platform focuses on education and equity in education. And again, specifically for those from the African-American background. And a lot of times I'm found on the ground advocating for those from Black and brown populations. And when we use the terms Black and brown, or you'll see the acronym BIPOC, it means Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. And so those are people who come from backgrounds that are not Anglican or not white, but are from other races outside of the European or white race.
Can I ask, what is the brown color? You say Black and brown. What is brown? What color is brown?
Black is usually referring to African American, those who
the Black. And then the brown?
Brown is anyone who's not white, Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous, the list goes all the way down from the brown color, because that's pretty much how it's separated in research and the way that it's termed, especially in the US, because we are a melting pot. Being a nation of people who we're technically all, foreign to the nation, because again, African Americans were brought through the institution of slavery, and then many other nations traveled for religious freedom, especially those from Europe, and then from other areas could be financial freedom from being, a part of a country where they had more affordabilities, better education, better healthcare. So that's where you get the migration of the Asians, the migration of those that come from India and from other parts of the world, which are, again, if they're non-Anglican, non-white, they fit in the brown category.
It's my first time to hear that the Asian people are called brown. I'm learning these things. Over to you, Carol Ann, please.
And I would imagine you're including mixed race in there as well, because I know my grandchildren are mixed race. So, and they're not Black, but they're color. They vary actually, all four of them. There's sort of variations on sort of brown. and one of them is almost white, bless him, and he got called white by one of his fellow pupils at school a few years ago, because he said, well, he's part Jamaican, and they go, no, but you're white, and he got quite upset because even though he's not white, he's quite light, and so again that was explained to him, and really, for me, it's about them understanding where they come from and being proud of that, and it's having the conversation that doesn't make things wrong. It just puts it into the context of what's being said, and so that you can then move forward with that, and sort of, he could then stand up and say, well, no, yes, I am from Jamaica. I'm not white. I am, brown. I've got colour, and not take it personally what's said, because I think that's where the upset comes, is when you take it personally, because if you cannot take it personally, just like that person said what they said, and it's then about educating them on, is that not so much the correct thing to say, but how it could impact, and it's about having conversations and educating people. And really, I sort of wonder, I love what you said, Dr. D, about being to be a successful citizen. That's all anybody wants, and actually that is about helping and empowering people to be successful citizens. But what you were saying, Nomsa, about it getting worse, what I actually, for me, it pops up and it pops up, and I go back to where I grew up, a town called Swindon, and we had a lot of people come over from Pakistan it was in the 60s, I think it was, and they took over all the corner shops, and there was a lot of racism then against them, and a not very nice term that people used to, I don't even like to want to say it, but
here.
So it's been around.
What did they used to say?
People used to call it packy bashing, because people were always being derogatory against them, creating, problems for them, and not welcoming them into the community. And really, it's about being able to welcome somebody. They've moved. Dr. D, you were saying people have moved, they've migrated for whatever reason. But I think it comes down to a lack of understanding someone else's culture, or fear that you're going to get pushed out in some way. In those days, the fear was, they saw all these people coming and taking over all the corner shops. So it's like the local people being put out of work. But actually, they took over the corner shops. They made a more successful job of it. You just need to get off your backside and do something about it instead of complaining about it or taking it out on people, But so it is getting to know people, getting to know their culture, and how can we work together. And I think it is something that is it brews and then it bubbles up and then it sort of quietens a bit. But I think there's something deeper here that needs addressing. And it does go to educating people, and educating children. And it comes to this understanding the culture and different cultures and how to be with them, and language, which you said, Dr. D, about, language, understanding people's language, the way they say things might not be the same way as you do. And again, that can cause friction, because I know that a lot of the way some of the Eastern Europeans, that they sort of speak English, it comes over very blunt. And as English, we're going, So again, it's understanding, well, this is just how they're saying it. They're not being rude or disrespectful. It's just their way of using, our language. And because we tend to be very polite, And And if we don't see others being as polite, pleases and thank yous, we think they're rude. It's the automatic, oh, you're being rude, or I don't like the way you said that. Just stop and think. So yeah, it is an age-old issue, I think, that has just come to the head again, and is here to be cleared again, I think, at another deeper level. The universe is saying, come on, it's time to really clear this and get to the grassroots of it.
Go ahead, Namsa. I looked like you were going to say something. I was just going to add on.
I watched one of the ITV. There was this black guy. He lives in the UK. He's a banker, and he basically was saying his life has been turned upside down because he says, I educated myself and I am one of the highest banker in the world, and I earn good money, but because of the cars that I drive, because of the home that I've built, he gets harassed by the police. They want to know where did he get the money to build a nice home? Where did he get the money to buy $100,000 car? Because he is black. And he's saying it's even affected him at work, although they don't have evidence against him, but they keep arresting him. They keep taking him to court just because of his color. So basically, like myself, I'm black. If I go and live in a community where, like, I live here with wealthy people, so people will be wondering where I get the money from. And basically, I get investigated, and I feel really, really sad that where is it written in the Bible that a white person should be the only one that is successful? Where is it written in the Bible? Because we were all created by the same creator. We are not being run by white people. We are all the same. So I felt really, really sad just watching. I think I'm gonna find his video because I found him on YouTube actually. His wife, she was saying his life basically has been turned upside down. Basically, they pick him up, they investigate him, and it's affecting his work, because when you are being taken by the police and they're investigating his work at work, they have no proof that he steals the money, but he says, my income is there. That is the proof they have of my income, but they keep arresting him. The guy wants to live a good life. He educated himself. Like my daughter wants to go to Singapore. One day she says, I want to be a banker. So if someone is willing to work hard for who they want to become, I don't see a crime for that. Like myself, some people, like when they talk about black people, they always say, oh, you are colored. I'm like, no, I'm not colored. I'm black. I'm a black woman. I was born and raised by black parents. So why would you call me colored? So I'm like, call me as I am. I am black. I'm black. That's how I define myself as a black person. But just because I'm black, there are no limitation. It's like the hoodie. When the teenagers wear hoodie, the police want to stop them. But when a white guys, I've seen it, like, I'm registered in the community where people selling stuff, sometimes watch a neighborhood, and sometimes the people will be typing, oh, I've seen a black person wearing a hoodie. I'm like, these people need to get a life, man. I love hoodies. It's a fashion. Does not mean I'm a thief. There's white people who are in prison, black people who are in prison. Come on. So I think that's where people need to understand that this world, God never created it to be run by white people. It's run by both a black woman and a black man, a white man and a white woman. Like myself, sometimes I get phone calls. The people who have not read my website, who have not gone to the website to see who is the owner. Sometimes they will ask you for somebody who ran the agents. I'm like, it's me, but I've never had any problems. I've only had one problem, that the guy wanted to saying, if you are the owner, you're a black person. I don't like black people, and I like to work with a white person if it's possible. And I'm like, no, thank you. Not in my company. You're not gonna register in my company if you're racist. Over to you, Dr. D.
I was going to say, go back to something Carol Ann said earlier about it being deeper. And I think that that's where the root of it all is. It's beyond what the eye can see. It's something that's racism is deeply rooted in hate, hatred for any other that's not like me, and not just the hatred of it, but because I have the advantage, I am now going to block your ability to be able to do the things that I have the privilege to do, because I don't think that you deserve it because of the color of your skin. And so that's really like the basis of what racism is. And of course, we know what being, inequality, not spreading resources equally to different types of people. One of the things that I like to share with individuals when they see my business, culture focused teaching, because I'm Black, they automatically think I'm coming to train about how to work with Black people or how to teach Black students. And that's a major part of it. But in simple terms, what I teach on is the ability to learn and understand different cultures and what those cultures bring to the table. As a former English teacher, of course, I have taught English and history from not only the American perspective, but I also, which is one of my favorite, have taught literature from both African literature, from British literature, Indian literature, Asian literature. I've taught literature from across different cultural spectrums. And all of those different types of literature, even Hispanic literature, those types of literature bring in so many different perspectives and gives you an understanding and an eye into some of those different cultures. And for many children who are families who have not traveled outside of their own culture, outside their own country, reading, of course, we know takes you places vicariously, right? Like when we read and we hear stories and we hear about what's happening in families, we begin to learn, a little bit about what that culture stands for when we're reading these stories. And so that's a way that I like to do my training. I always like to start with stories or share a story, regardless of what type of culture or what race or people we're discussing. But it is, it's rooted, racism is rooted deeply in hatred and the desire to block all others from the privilege that have been granted that was based on racist practices, which, in a lot of cases, and again, I can speak from the lived experiences of an African American who's, if I, I can trace, at least on my father's side, my generation, my father's side, about 9 generations back. And on my mother's side, maybe about 4 or 5. And as we go through those generations, and as I talk to other African Americans, many of us are descendants of our ancestors who were brought to the Americas through the institution of slavery. And we have in some way, shape, or form experienced discrimination, racism, prejudice because we were Black. And having to say, just because we're Black doesn't mean we're not knowledgeable. It doesn't mean that we can't run institutions and agencies at higher levels. It doesn't mean that we can't be wealthy. As a matter of fact, it's interesting to me that in most countries, including Europe, including the UK, in most areas that, African Americans are looked at as strange for having resources and wealth, when in most cases the countries were built off the backs of slaves. They were built off the backs of those that were enslaved. So it's really a dichotomous idea that we can't work for what we need when we literally work to build these countries. And so it's an interesting perspective, and it shows you how blinding racism is, because hate will make you see what you want to see and not necessarily what's actually there. And so it's happening all over our world to different types of people. Like I said, you will hear me speak about the instances of being Black in America, being Black. I'm a Black traveler. I travel all over, and I've gotten different types of reactions when I lived in Asia, when I'm in the Caribbean, when I was in the UK, Africa. I get different reactions depending on where I'm at, and it's all interesting to me because I'm an observer. And it's a part of the work that I have to do is, besides the research, I have to observe people. There are so many different theories out there about racism. There are theories out there about who's Black, who's not Black, who's, in our case in America, like I said, we use Black and brown or Black, Indigenous, person of color, and that's something like every generation, as we come up with more understanding, things change. Like at one time we were colors in America. Then it shifted from colors. Well, initially we were a really bad word. We were niggers. That's the derogatory term that we were called, in America. And then it went from niggers to colored, gals. We were not called women. We were gals. Men, Black men were called boys to their face. I mean, these are 30, 40, 50-year-old men with families were called boy to their face. So we went through after enslavement. Then there's this, these Jim Crow practices, especially in the South. I'm from the South. I'm from South Carolina, which is really one of the most deeply rooted racist states in our country. South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, a lot of those states are really, really strongly rooted in the old South. And still wanting to keep, specifically Black people in bondage and prevent them from getting in positions and on economic advancement and those things. Now, across the nation, things are changing for us. But you'll see the transition, and with the different names, then we go from person of color to Afro-Americans, Afro-Americans to African-Americans. And now everybody's like, I'm Black. It's just like, it's just one of those things where every generation, as they pick up on their own theoretical understanding, practices, that changes. At one time, to Miss Carol Ann's point, talking about her children who are a mixed race, at one time during the 80s and the 90s, and I remember this so vividly because I would listen to, I come from, some of my family are educators, and I would listen to the dialogue at one point in time, and even through research, if you were of mixed race and you had a Black parent, then you were considered Black because Black is the dominant of the actual gene pool. Black is the dominant. And so for so long, when you've dealt with a race of people who've been treated as inferior, it was a hard concept to understand that, whoa, if my child has a Black parent or a white parent, they really are technically considered Black by, genome pools. But they then started putting in mixed race. They put all those things like on job applications, college applications, because people started to say, well, I don't want to just be Black if I have a white parent or Hispanic parent or an Asian parent. So they begin to now break down those different things as it relates to what they identify themselves as. And that's important. And that's why we have to talk about race and racism, because it's rooted in identity. You can't say, I don't see color. That's not a way to appear anti-racist. As a matter of fact, it's a way to really overlook the bruise of people who've actually been through racism. Like, if you don't see color, then you don't see the rest of the world. And what's interesting is that is a common phrase from those who are not of people of color, usually white or Anglican people, that say we don't see color. And that's not the appropriate phrase that you want to use when you're trying to tackle racism. You ought to see color because we're all different hues. We're all different types. I mean, you can see a Black person whose skin may be what we call in the United States, they may be high yellow. which means they are brighter hue, or they could be really, really dark skin, really, really dark, but they're still black. But they're different variations. And that's the same way in a lot of other cultures as well. But it all boils down to identity. And people want to be identified. They want to be seen. They want to feel safe. They want to feel supported. And racism goes against all of that. And so that's a simple form of understanding how to tackle it, is learn about other cultures so that you can help people feel safe, seen, and supported, so that they can feel that they're contributing as a good citizen to society, because that's what we want. We want to be identified of who we are, celebrated for who we are, and receive the opportunities, and not looked at as it's an anomaly if a Black person is rich or wealthy in an area. That's kind of wild and asinine to me, and really shows a deep level of ignorance, going back to my previous point, that most African Americans who live in specific nations that are primarily dominated by Anglican or white people, we literally built those nations. So to say that we can't work for what we need is, again, like I said, is ignorant and asinine.
What you were saying about that phrase, we don't see color, I think there's a lack of understanding phrases to use, and it's like a communication that's a bit clumsy, because actually I think what's being meant is that we just see everybody as a human being, and I think maybe there's something that could be, maybe a better phrasing. What would you say would be a better phrasing to use?
I still think that when you say, I think we're all human beings, still takes away the identity of the individualities of who we are, because individualism is important. That is important to people. People are tied to their identity. And, if you are trying to, I would say, if you are trying to mediate, or if you are trying to share in the concern over a specific type of people, I think it is okay to say, I see you as a Black woman. I see you as an Asian man. I see you. I see you. Like, I literally see you. Like, and I think that's okay when we begin to, because what happens is that phrase, it comes from white fragility. I don't want to deal with the drama and the negativity of racism. So instead of calling people or sharing or saying things from what they are, we kind of use these backdoor sort of phrases just to kind of make ourselves feel better, because we know that there's damage that has been done by our culture to peoples across the world. So instead of facing it and saying, I see you, Black woman, I see you, Black man, it's like, I don't see color. No, it makes you feel better, but it makes everybody else feel like, what, am I not visible here? So it's rooted in white fragility, which deals with white people being fragile related to talking about racism, because it's rooted in an institution that was founded by their culture. And so that's kind of where that comes from. And so we got to we got to deal with that and be okay with saying, people, I see you for who you actually are.
And that will make you happy, because that's who I am as well. So I'll be happy if you actually, there are some people who are scared of basically call you like Black and asking like questions about your culture. But I'm not afraid like meeting Carol Ann and asking her about her culture, because I can define that Carol Ann is not actually from my culture. So even when I was growing up, my dad used to explain to me that we do have a white blood in our family, because we do. So and I was sharing it yesterday. I did my heritage for my bloodline, just to see where my ancestors are coming from. Basically, they are everywhere. They are in Europe, they are in Africa, everywhere. And in America, I've got heritage that I didn't know existed. So basically, and when I was like checking, I was like, all my life, I grew up thinking I was South African. And when I did um, the test, South Africa is there, but is there my family are from Kenya? And I was like, what? And I was like, started to find out where everything goes. It goes back to basically my family. We have a royal blood, a king. There was a king in the family, and they bought the land in South Africa. That's why my family ended up in South Africa. They own the land in Cape Town, and Mozambique, which is now South Africa, and they bought the land Limpopo, and I think it's the border is in Zimbabwe, so they own the land there. So that's when I came to realize that's why I ended up where I was. But if I wouldn't do those research to find out, basically I would be saying I am South African. But now I'm starting to actually, if someone was to ask me, where Nomsa, where do you come from? I'm doing some research for me to define my heritage, to say, okay, hang on, this is where I was born, but I'm not from there. I'm from Kenya. But I wouldn't know if I didn't do the test. I wouldn't actually know. And when I started, I'm doing research to find out how do I end up then in Africa. And I realized actually my ancestors are in Europe. They began in Europe. Slavery ended up in Zimbabwe. So Nigeria. So I was like, wow, I have a Nigerian blood. Nigerians are smart. So I'm starting to realize where my intelligence coming from. You see, sometimes it's nice because when you actually saying you're white, that is a limitation. You have to do some research and find out your bloodline. For me, I was like, wow, in Nigeria, I have a Nigerian heritage. I'm taking this, and started finding out and looking at my behavior. And I was like, because my dad was very, very a proud man. He was a proud black man who basically wanted to know who he was. And when I said I was going to Europe, he was like, that's where we are coming from. That's where our ancestors coming from. And we ended up in Africa, and he's busy talking. I'm like, this one is just, like when you're in that age where you're like, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I'm African. How do I end up in Europe? But his talk, him talking to me, writing everything in on his diary, I've never dismissed it. I just wanted to know more. And that's when I realized actually my ancestors are everywhere. Sierra Leone, in America, France is amazing.
No, I was gonna say too, you kind of get my you got my brain going here, and I'm excited because what you're saying is so important to why we've got to talk about this topic. Now, fortunately, because I was raised by my grandparents and older people back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we were more family oriented during that time. And being raised by my grandparents, heritage was important. And I was raised by my grandparents who knew their family and could take us back. That's why I'm able to trace the generation back. And then also know about, my family that migrated from different parts of Africa, the Caribbean, and who are like, I can trace all the way back to Ethiopia. Like my blood is Ethiopian blood. And so, but what you're saying as it relates to going back and doing that pretty much in your adulthood, that's the story of most Black people in America. They only understand what they know in their communities. They have no idea about tracing and tracking their heritage back to the different parts of the world, because generations, especially now, a lot of generations have changed and everybody's just focused on the here and now. And so I think that but it comes from the lack of privilege in America. Most white Americans can trace their heritage back to, when their families came over, whether it was during the Irish coming over, or whether it was during, they can go back to the Mayflower incident where Europeans were fleeing Europe for religious freedom, or a lot of them can go back because privilege has allowed them to have the resources and access that stuff and that information, and being raised in their families a certain way. for so long, whereas the institution of slavery had caused so much division in our families. So having to track and find, like, wow, the person that raised this particular family member was not their actual parent, but their parent might have been separated or sent to another part of America, may have even died during enslavement. And we're finding out all of these different things, as time goes on. And for some people, they never find out. They never understand why they have the desires that they have, and not realize that they had a great grandmother or great great grandfather that had a desire to be a farmer or feed the community, or lead in community, or be a banker, or be an educator. Like, some people are like, I don't know where these desires come from. And in our heritage and our culture, many times it comes from our ancestors. If we continue to work that our ancestors have done. And so I don't think it's strange that I'm in education, and my focus has been education and culture. My grandmother was an educator. Many of my family members were astute members of the community, raising farmers. So they felt the need to feed the community, help people. So a lot of my community engagement, all of that comes from my ancestral history. And then as I trace back even further into Ethiopia and Africa, I find out more about the education perspective and my desire to see transformation and change, which is why I have developed and understand myself as a transformational leader. It goes back to the Maasai tribe, different types of people across the African continent. Now, I have European blood as well. My grandmother on my mother's side, her mom was mixed blood. She was white and Native American. So I have the Anglican blood within my bloodline that goes back to parts of Europe. So there are, parts of who I am that I've learned. But again, I've done that because I was raised, to understand culture and heritage, but I also was surrounded by people who had access to that type of information. And we're talking the 80s and 90s, so now the Gen Z generations are raised by parents who are my age or maybe a little bit older. And that's just not been something that's been on the forefront of their minds. And so children now coming up through this heightened racist society are like, no, I need to know my roots. Where do I come from? And so again, it's a conversation that we have to have, because many families were divided, through institutions of slavery and discrimination. And it didn't just happen, of course, in African American people, but it'll happen across this world. There are many Asians, Europeans. There are many people who went through several periods of time in history where families were divided. We can talk about the Holocaust, the Jews, and just different aspects of people who've been divided, or family members lost their lives in the fight against racism and injustice. And people are now, in our generation, we're picking up the pieces and tracking and tracing that history back. But it's so important. But it's an important topic to talk about, because in order to really know how to deal with this, it's important to know who you are. And that's why that identity and visibility is so important.
I agree. It is about knowing yourself, find your identity, but you have to be comfortable with who you are. And I think it's very important. I mean, these are some skills that really need to be shared and taught with a lot of people, because actually being able to track and trace your family is a skill. And I know my dad he traced our family tree, and that was interesting to see where we went back to. Because we're not just a pure race here in this country. When you think of how many different races have come into this country, and and I think a lot of British do think, we're British. Well, actually, when we look at our history, we've got the Romans, the Saxons, the Vikings, the Normans, who all invaded us, and anyone else. So we're not a pure race, even though we might think or like to think we are. And I think that's what we forget. We forget that background, that there is all of that, as well as influence from other European countries. So being able to track and trace would be an amazing skill for people to learn and to really get to know their background. And and their culture, but get to know themselves and understand who they are, and yes, why they behave like they do. You know, what makes them who they are. Again, that's a really key point that I think you made there, Dr. D. But it's like, well, how can we really get, because the root for me, it's like it's talked about and talked about and talked about, but talking does not get it out and out, you know,
Right.
because it's like it's allowed to be talked about and then left to fester and still there. For me, it's something that needs to be pulled out by the root, such that it can then be healed, such that it can then be, over time, be something that just fades away and really leaves us.
Gotcha.
You know, because it keeps being brought up, and all it's doing is just raising it again. So what can we do? For me, the question is, what can we do to really get to the root and pull it out and heal right back there? Any ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, because one of the chapters in my book that I talk about specifically, and it is targeted towards Anglican and white educators within this specific book, and that is really self-evaluation. In order to get to the root of anything, is you got to look at yourself. You got to see how have your own biases gotten in the way of you truly understanding, you know, someone from a different culture. And the reason why it's
okay, hold on. I'm sharing something here. Hold on.
Hang on a second.
Okay, I'm sharing something. It is my DNA. You see my DNA, where my ancestors began? And you see it in Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, Czech Republic, Australia, and France, Switzerland. And then we go to, that is Europe. And then France is there. And then you've got Kenya in Nigeria. Where there is blue, that's where is a strong heritage. And then we go to America. You see here, Colombia, Peru, and Argentina. And then you said you have heritage in Ethiopia.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Central Africa here. I don't know if you can see.
Ethiopia is going to be East Africa.
Yeah, I don't have anything in East Africa. I've got something in Central Africa and Sierra Leone. See there. So that's my DNA.
Okay.
So you can continue, Carol Ann.
No, it was me. I was answering her question. But I'm getting feedback since you pulled up the. Okay, now it's better. I was like, what is happening? But oh gosh, I kind of forgot what I was saying. Caroline, do you remember what I was saying?
You were saying about your book, Selfevaluation.
Yeah. Yes.
How we own our own biases. Yeah.
Yes, I get it. So self-evaluation, because to say, and I'm going to use your phrase just as an example, Caroline, because I hear it. You know, how can we just get over it? How can we just stop it? And I'll share with you something that I usually share with people, you know, because I'm a Christian believer. And so I sometimes use like biblical texts just to kind of make a point. And one of the texts, you know, one of the scriptures, when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and many of the community peoples, and they were talking about, you know, what he was doing and all the miracles and just different things. And they were trying to kind of catch him, you know, in some type of insurrection or something. And so they begin to talk about, well, what about the poor and what about these type of people and so on and so forth. And he makes a statement. He says, the poor will be with you always. And so when I think about that, I think about issues in our society, because we're human, is always going to be with us. I don't believe that racism is actually going to go anywhere, because we're people and people are flawed. So even if it's not something that they're raised in, we can go into reading. I mean, I can go right now. If my parents never introduced me to racism, but if I go Google right now, because I got something in my heart towards my Black or my Asian or my Hispanic or whatever student in my class picking on me, and now I don't like Black people, I don't like Asians, I can go right now online and I can find a hate group. I can find any information that I want to help fortify what I'm already feeling in my heart. So we have access to what builds, and what we feed. So I don't think it's ever going to go anywhere. And I think that's, again, one of those areas. And I'm using it because it was said, but that's one of the things that I often hear from the white community members. How do we just deal with it? It's never going to go anywhere. How do you deal with it is where you start. How do you individually face some of the inherited and or chosen biases that you might have picked up along the way? What type of conversations have you had with people outside of your race about real issues and real questions that you have about these particular people? I would like to hear and this is what I tell people, and because I specifically deal in the education realm as we talk about education inequities, and a lot of my audience and clients are, like I said, they're Anglican, they're white, and I speak very candidly, because to me, that's the only way that we get to an understanding, which is the idea, is to get to an understanding of how we work together on this rock. This planet is a rock. We've been given the privilege to work here together. We may not always get along at all times, but how can we understand one another better to really make this place a better place for our children's children? That's the objective. Not necessarily getting rid of, because we'll never get rid of sicknesses. We'll never get rid of death. Those are things that we're things that are enamored, because we're a fallen world. We're a fallible people, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to have ideologies that will be challenged throughout our life. But how do we do a better job of understanding one another? And what I like to do is I tell my clients, I want you to have the discussions with your friends and colleagues and students that are not from your background, that don't have your same color, that don't have your same economic status, that don't have your same privilege. I want you to have the conversations you're having at the dinner table at home with your husband and your children, because that's when we get to the root of it. That's when we get to, what are you talking about at the dinner table? What are you saying when you see something on the news about a Black person or a Hispanic person or Asian person? What is the thought that comes to your mind? What is the conversation? Because that conversation needs to come to when we're talking and discussing with another Black person, another Asian person, whomever. That's the conversation we need to talk about. And so that's where we start getting into the uncomfortability. Like, I don't want to really share what's really in my head about what I thought when I saw this, because it's going to make me look racist, or it's going to make me look this. Well, that's the whole point of dealing with it. Like, it may make you look racist. It may reveal that you are racist, but that's how we deal with it, is being able to really tackle, those ideologies, those mindsets, what's being said, but bringing those private conversations to the forefront. And I will add this caveat, because I know when most people hear me say that, a lot of people go, oh my God, I don't think I can do that. But what I do in my system is I create a healthy space for it. Like, I'm not going to, in my seminars and workshops, I don't create a hostile environment. I always create an environment where people feel as comfortable as possible. Now, I don't pull teeth. I'm not a dentist, not that type of doctor. So I don't pull teeth. But what I do is I create an environment where people feel as safe as possible, as supported, even if they realize, wait, I am racist. And then I go, well, it's okay, because it's a new day. And now you have some new information that can help you become anti-racist and deal with some of those racist practices or racist or discrimination that you may have practiced in the past. And now we can move forward, blah, 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 blah. That's how we do it. We do it by bringing in those who are educated, who are specialists, who work in the area, but who have compassion for people. You have to have compassion for people. It's not an easy topic for anyone to talk about, but you have to create an environment for compassion where, like I said in the beginning, this is what I do in my business. I help people feel safe, seen, and supported. And that's all people, no matter what background and no matter what issues they bring to the table. And that's where we get started. We got to look at the man in the mirror and then find safe and supported places where we're really able to share what we really think about other people and how to think better or get more resources to understand those people so that we can change our frame of thinking.
I agree with you, Dr. D. I think racism is not going to go away. The reason why I'm saying that I think is part of it is there's something, when somebody behaves in a certain way, that means there is part of them that is possessed. For me, that's how I say it. If you look at me and define me with my color, not wanting to know who I am, if you see me, you see a black person. Like when I see Carol Ann, I already know there's white people, there's black people. So if I want to meet Carol Ann, I'll be interested in Carol Ann's culture, her life story. I don't care about her color because I already know her color. I want to know her history. I want to know her ancestors, her growing up in England, because to me that is exciting. That is a story that I can hold on to it. I can learn from Carol Ann with her story. But when I'm defining her as a white, and then I'm saying you and becoming racist, for me, I think it's a demon. It says part of it that is demonic. So that's why before it used to upset me. But when I understood, I read the Bible. You know, when you're reading something, it's like you're reading personal development. You're taking personal development journey, but you don't understand what it means. And you're not going deep. Your mind is not made up. Your head is not made up his mind to actually connect and understand your journey, who you are. So I read the Bible. I didn't get it when I was a Christian from a very young age. But when I understood the difference between God, Jesus, and Lucifer, his son, that's when I actually came to realize that when people say there is no sickness, before he connected to me, Lucifer, I didn't know that. I honestly thought the sickness existed. And it was the time where I started looking at when I have a flu, the different when I having a flu. And I was like, no, that's not real. And then I started questioning, and I remember I was questioning and praying. He laughed, showing me that actually I'm the one who is doing it. And it was the behavior, people's behavior, when I started defining it. And then I was like, these people are being controlled. So when people like Tony Robbins and the other speakers, they speak, these people have gone through this journey. I was like, I'm not going to allow, since then, in the day when I refused that there is no flu, when I'm starting having a flu symptoms, I tell him off and I was like, get out. And it's like it goes. Or sometimes I go and put my ears or do something silly and I just go that I don't believe it. It goes away. So that's when I started realizing and going deep into spirituality, the Bible, and starting to understand the scriptures and the Bible, and everything that is written in scriptures is happening today. So that's why I'm saying, okay, this is how it works. And before I didn't understand it. And then he appeared himself and he made my life a living hell. But I was like, hell no, I'm not joining you. And I was like, join me or follow everybody else falling down. I was like, I choose to fall. And he was like, I give you everything you have ever wanted. I was like, you can't give me everything that I have ever wanted. I want God. And he was like, if you want powers like Jesus, I was like, no, there's no one that can perform miracles like him. He is individual. He's always going to be individual. And he was like, my father's name, and said my name, and I was like, you are bonkers. So that's when I realized that actually there are some people who are joining him, who are accepting him in their lives, and that's why we are all suffering. So do I believe that racism will go away? I don't think so. is how you receive it as a Black person. There's a guy next door, my neighbor. He can be very aggressive sometimes when he's talking to people, our other neighbors. But that is life. We have to put up with that. We have to define who we are as people. If I meet somebody calls me racist now, I just look at them and say, wow, you're bonkers. And I look at my life and be grateful, honestly, and be grateful to God for giving me this black color. My color is a skin color. You don't age very quickly. There are so many beneficial about Black people. We are talented. I think what people don't realize is when you put a Black person and a white person, we are there to complement each other. Bring white people's knowledge, bring Black people's knowledge, mix it together. Can you imagine what you can produce? Amazing things. But we don't think that way.
No, I was going to add something. I know we're kind of closing out, but for those that will come back and watch the replay, and just for clarity, 3 things actually. One, as a believer, I also understand the damage that religion also played in slavery, especially in America. And so when we begin to talk religiously or about biblical standards as it relates to, of course, the Bible supporting, not supporting, I'll be honest, there's a movement, especially amongst Black people in America, that are turning away from the Christian ideology, from the biblical perspective, because the Bible was used as a tool, in a sense, in a literal sense, to literally whip Black Americans into shape, or whip us into control and manipulation, whip our ancestors into obedience and subjection based on some of the enslavement that was actually written about in the Bible, because there are elements of enslavement that are written about in the Bible. And so I think I think it's a thing to be cautionary, as it relates to the fact that I have biblical history in my background, helps me to break these elements down to people who are of faith, so that they can see that, again, that's why when people say, is racism going anywhere, it's interesting to me, especially if you're a Christian believer. I'm like, do you not realize the beginning of your Bible starts with racism? I mean, it's just funny to me, because, it's like, no, it's just like anything else. It's a disease. It's a dis-ease, in the mind, body, and soul. And so I wanted to kind of share that, especially when we start talking about that, and be empathetic to people of color and Black people specifically, who are just like, don't tell me anything about the Bible, because this is what was used to support the institution of slavery, in our country, or period. Also, I was going to say, Caroline was mentioning about some of the those that were brought in, the melting pot of the UK, so on and so forth. But I would also challenge, especially you all living in the UK, to really do research on the Moors, Moors, is because they had a heavy influential impact.
Can you spell it again?
Moors.
Okay.
They had a heavy influential impact on the development of Europeans, and they were Black. They were from Africa. And so I want you to definitely do some research there. Of course, if you're doing any type of Google or web research, you kind of have to know how to eat the meat and spit out the bones on some instances, because some people are going to be far left, some people will be far right. So it's important to make sure that, you kind of use your discernment to be able to kind of, and then always research on top of research. Use something else to kind of, validate what you're researching. So that's another thing as well, because the Moors were very influential in the development of a lot of nations, especially when we talk about Europe, Northern Africa, coming from more of like the Morocco era, Cameroon, all of those areas. So definitely do some, some research there. And then you also mentioned about, this is the final caveat, because This is something that Euro and white America, they try to argue this point, but it's so invalid. And you said something when someone accused you of being racist. Specifically in America and typically all over the world, if you are Black, and specifically from a culture of color, especially if it's been marginalized in any way, financially, educationally, socioeconomically, whatever, you cannot be racist. Racism is selected to Anglo white because they have the privilege. Racism deals with access, influence, and in these areas, Black people and people of color don't have influence. They don't have the access. They don't have the material to really move and shape. Name a major Black owner of a major bank or a major team or things that really shape and move our world. And typically you're not going to find that because those are usually people who operate in the white or Anglo. Those are the people who are in control of finances, of business, of economics, of innovation. A lot of them are in control of those areas. And it is rooted in and is coming from, that specific area or group, but it can be adopted in different ways in the behavior. But as it relates to being a racist, Black people can't be racist. There's no way, because we can't hold people down. I cannot prevent you as a Black person from the privilege that you have going into a room where people immediately see color difference, and we can go on the same job and I can have, in some cases, the same qualifications, maybe even better. But if depending on that person, if they are racist, they're going to hire a white person over me simply because they have the privilege and the access. And so it's like different, elements. And there's been an argument about that. But you cannot be, if you don't have the access and the power. You have to have the power in order to actually be racist. And there's theoretical research on it. So you can go out there and do all of that. This is, 19 years in the making here. But you can do all of that. But you can find all of that information to help you better understand, because racism is not just a word we throw out. There's principles and practices to racism. It's just not something that we say. There's an ideology to racism. And like I said in the beginning of this conversation, it's about we have the privilege and we decide who gets it. And when you look across the world, and specifically I can talk about my lived experience and the lived experiences of those who look like me in the United States, the ownership, the access still belongs to those from white and Anglo America, and that access still has not been spread, that information. Now, let me tell you something. Our Gen Zers in America, which is a different generation, Gen Z, they're starting to break that up because they're now starting to see, wait a minute. So you get your young Gen Z children who are white or who are from different backgrounds or who are Black or from Asian. They're like, you know what? Screw racism. We're going to work together and we're going to make it happen. So you're now starting to see more Black wealth starting to come to the forefront. You're starting to see more of it now here in America. And most people outside of America think, well, Michael Jackson is wealthy, Oprah Winfrey are wealthy, and they like to name celebrities, right? To make it seem like no Black people have access. No, you can't name celebrities. Those are in elite statuses to determine whether the access is there from the bottom to the top, because everyone should be able to have, access to be able to grow and develop and become effective citizens, not just at a celebrity level, but even in their local community. You would not imagine the stoppage that happens just because a person is Black, but most of the ownership is white. So it's like different, it goes higher than our discussion and interaction, but it's about the powers that be and those that are able to move and shape different things. So that's kind of the idea, again, of racism is I have the privilege and I have the determination of who deserves this type of privilege or be able to move forward. And again, in most cases, it's Eurocentric, it's Euro-America in our case. But I'm starting to see a little light, again, with our Gen Zers, because our younger generation is like, forget all of this. Forget all of this type of stuff. Let's work together. And I'm hoping to see just a better collaboration amongst people from different races. Like you said, what would it look like if we came together? And it's not just, white Anglo just has a privilege in America, but even there's large cases of Asians being racist against blacks, Hispanics being racist against blacks. Like, blacks are typically at edge with everybody. Like, it's just because of the color of our skin, it's just like black is somewhat inferior and so on. And this case it's been proven across our world. You can read literature, you can do the research, and you can see that it's just something about that black color. But when you actually do a lot of your own studies, you will find that there's an agenda to keep the black race down. And again, I add to the point that I said earlier. It's interesting to me that through enslavement and through institutions of education and partnering and networking, we as a black race have built many countries, many areas. We've contributed economically, we've contributed, but yes, we're seen as the lesser. So it's just very interesting to me. But I just want to admonish, you all and your audience, do your studies, do your self-diligence to do your studies so that you can become a little bit more aware of how far and vast the idea of racism actually extends.
I think at the moment we have 13 or 14 billionaires, black billionaires. And I think if you don't limit your life yourself because of your color, then you can get to where you need to go. And the color is just a color. I don't know if you have ever watched the TV series called The Chosen, when God actually selected his disciples. He selected from the rich and selected people you wouldn't think he would pick the rejected one, the broken one. He would just go and they'll be like, Jesus of Nazareth, why would you want? And he was showing that no matter how wealthy you are, in his eyes, you are still there. You're still a normal person. So does wealth define us? So you just have to, I think you have to know who you are, like Dr. D says, do some research. Like myself, I'm really determined to get to know my ancestors. That's why I did my DNA, to find out basically more about where I come from, find out who my ancestors were, what made them do the things that they did in the slavery, just to understand that journey. And when I'm actually investigating now, I have a feeling that the surname that I'm using might not be my original surname. They might have changed the surname to actually fit in where they were, because it doesn't correspond. If my ancestors began in Europe, so I'm asking myself, why have I got this surname that I have? So I'm thinking, my dad is gone now. He was a smart one. If he was here, he would have explained that. So I'm trying to dig. If I have to hire an investigator, like to really dig deep, people find the information that I wouldn't find, I will do it just to be proud of my heritage. Over to you, Carol Ann. Do you have anything you want to say before we go, or any words of encouragement? Please do.
A really diverse discussion. It's really interesting. And I like what you were saying about the Bible and religion, because I've always been aware that people just pick out bits that they want to reinforce what they want to say and to make their point. And it is only a collection of stories, and they are a selection. There's so many other things that were left out of the Bible, but it's like they make that the be all and end all. So it is be aware of that and be careful. And you can pick anything to make it to add, to use to add weight to your argument. So it is about researching, as Dr. D was saying. But again, be discerning about it. But I love what you said about actually self-evaluation. And for me, that's key. It's about understanding yourself, evaluating yourself, and what your thoughts and biases are and becoming aware of it and being authentic. And being authentic means you own up to, oh gosh, I was thinking this, about this person or about them, and own up to it. But it's also for the other person not to make them wrong. And I think this is important. If we do start being authentic and owning up to our thoughts and what we're thinking, don't make them wrong. Have a conversation about it. So it's being able to converse, and it is about having that self-evaluation. And I love that idea about sitting with friends and have the conversations you would have with family around the table. What a lovely idea, But yeah, get to know them. So I just would. The other thing was, for me, I think if we say you won't ever get rid of racism, then you've spoken it out. And I think you have to be careful about the power of the spoken word. I think anything is possible. So I prefer to create the possibility that something can shift around the conversation of racism, and open up.
Not only Lucifer is involved. Remember, that is the part of the game. It's part of life. You're having somebody challenging somebody. So it's part of the game.
Yeah, I think I agree with the latter part of navigating the conversation, navigating the issue of racism. But I'm a believer. I believe in the power of the spoken word. I'm a prophet, so I understand the power of words. But I also am a realist. I'm a realist, and I'm an educated theorist. So I understand, what is what it is. It just really is what it is. At the end of the day, I'm hopeful that they'll find a cure to cancer. It may not happen in my lifetime, but I'm hopeful that they'll find a cure for it. But for years, my grandparents, my parents, I'm almost mid-40s. So for years, we've believed that there'll be a cure for cancer. It has not happened yet. So until there's an actual cure, we're going to find ways to make sure we don't get it, right? Like we make sure that we eat healthy, or we try to avoid as much as possible not to get it, because we know that it will affect our body a certain way. But as long as it's here, as long as we know it will be here, we find a way to navigate. I don't see it, again, as people, we're flawed. And I think that's important. I think that sometimes, and I've born and raised at the altar in church my whole life, and I've seen it done from so many different perspectives. And I just want us to I think balance is important for me. Balance in every way of life. And I'm a Libra, so I guess that just speaks for itself too. I believe in balance. And so I think that it's important to believe and have a healthy belief system, but also understanding the reality of this world that we live in is very fallen. And we do what we can, and we be good. We be as good as possible. We speak as good as possible as we can, but keeping in mind that there is a reality. There's a duality of reality, as I like to say. There's a spiritual reality, and there's a physical reality, the metaphysical reality, the things that we're dealing with. And I think it's important to acknowledge them, and say that, hey, I'm hoping that some way we'll all be able to live in this earth and no one hates anybody. I think it's, again, if you are a believer, especially if you are a biblical believer, the foundation of the Bible starts with a relationship that is broken apart. God and Satan has to bring man in. So we're going to always deal with dark and light.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're going to always deal with that. So that's why I say these things will be among us. It's how we navigate through them. That's the aspect of walking or having faith. That's the aspect of having a religion, is learning how to navigate between the polarities of dark and light, good and bad. Right. So that's kind of, that's why I say what I said. The reality is a lot of the things that we see in this world will never go anywhere, but we have to learn how to navigate through them. Sin, temptations, All of those things are not going anywhere. Imagine you go on a diet, you're trying to do right. That ice cream shop's not moving. I don't care how much you pray. It's not moving, right? But you have to navigate. You decided you're not doing sweets for 3 months. You've got to navigate past that ice cream shop because it's not going anywhere. You made a decision to do something different. And that's what racism, it's coming out of it, being anti-racist. I'm going to make a decision that all of this is here. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to learn something different. I'm going to circumvent this. I'm going to learn a new way. And eventually, as we continue to do that, you'll find less and less of it. Just like with any other thing in life, you'll find less and less of the evil or the darkness or the bad when more people just start doing good. So that's the framework that I speak as, not as one that's morbid, unhopeful, but one that deals with a balance of navigating our faith.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. D. And for me,
I just ask what's the name of your book?
Culture Focused Teaching.
Thank you.
I just want to say, I know you are a prophecy. I basically give you guys credit because I basically said one day I pray I'm going to fast. I want to hear the spirit realm. I want to see God speak. I want to hear what happened. But hey, the world is messed up. Honestly, is messed up spiritually. I always hear people saying, God, what, like when people are sinning, like when people judging people, like why? I'm like, wow. Get deep, then you won't be able to judge anyone. Spiritually is messed up. So that's why I'm saying racism, will it go away? It will go away when God comes. That's when it goes away. Because it's a challenge. Basically, we are being challenged. Spiritually, there are some people say, I don't believe in God. And they say, when you say you're manifesting, you're this, basically there's two people that owns the world, God and Lucifer. So if you don't believe in God, you are on his side, basically, but it says, come as you are. So that's why I'm saying racist, it will go away when he comes, when the man himself comes on earth. But the meantime, we just have to keep spreading love. We have to embrace England. They've lost. My boys didn't lose. I believe in them. England did not lose. I believe in them. If England lost, you tell me you're a prophecy. Speak the truth. Why did he enter the England while England and Italy were playing? Why did they interfere? So Lucifer interfered. For me, why Satanism interfere when England is playing? So I'm gonna stick to my boys and say my boys won. So okay, welcome Gossip Talk Show. We're gonna have to leave now. We've run out of time, nearly half an hour. So we're here Monday to Friday, everyone. If you want to get in touch with the speakers, please go to our page and get in touch with them. I think Dr. D, we need to. I think from now on, we're just gonna have Gossip Talk Show have racism maybe once a month or twice a month, just a topic about racism, just to raise awareness. So we're gonna do that. We promise the audience we're gonna do that. So bye everyone. Live with grace. Have a good week.